All right, how we doing? My daughter Parker is behind the camera. She just gave me the thumbs up or the three fingers or however she was reading me off there. So we're going to share with you tonight a little bit about our bookstore, but mostly something that's come out of wine night, being that we all can't be open. Like many businesses everywhere, Stone Harbor is in a business shutdown except for essential businesses, which some may consider book reading to be essential. And it is in a way, but not for how they're going to quantify it. So we figure we're going to bring wine night to you a different way. In the summers, we have a night called wine night where we share with our friends some wine, some stories, and it's just a night to we're open for retail, but it's a night to share in what we do here at the bookstore, which, be honest with you, it's more than business, it's more than profits. It's about getting richer, talking to people and getting to know them and sharing in their lives, and books are a big part of people's lives. So welcome to the first installment of what I've called the Bayside Book Chat. Try to come up with something catchy and rhymey. It was inspired to me by listening recently to presidential leadership, and FDR was one of our great presidents that not only got us out of the ends of the Great Depression, but got us through World War II with over 30 what he called fireside chats, which I don't know if he's going to be as rambling or as disorganized as I am, but they're renowned, and I hope to not only shed light on it, but maybe get an ounce of what he did. So like I said, in the summer, we do wine night from May to October on Wednesday nights. Tonight is Wednesday, so here we are. So it is a night of friends, sunsets, chit-chat, stories, and then we talk about books, authors, history, philosophy, whatever anybody wants to talk about. And we share a glass of wine. So I'm going to create my first sponsor. They barely know about it, and I bought it myself. But every week we'll talk about a different wine, and maybe as it relates to books. So my choice tonight is a nice Chianti, as the author of Silence of the Lambs, Thomas Harris, refers to, of course, in the movie. So I'm having a nice Chianti. We'll see what we bring next week. As you can see, I've got a pile of books around me, which are going to be related to the things we're going to talk about. So cheers. As they say in Costa Rica, one of my favorite places, Pura Vida, which means the good life. So here's to the good life, and cheers to a lot of people who aren't here. My buddy Jay, who's holed up in Switzerland somewhere, Gail down in Houston. Obviously a lot of our visitors and locals alike aren't out and about, but I would like to thank previous owners of the store, my employees, I should say our employees. Actually, this store is technically owned by my wife. It's a family business. So to our employees, to people who book scout for me, including my parents, my brother, Bruce Garland, Jay, they're people who go out. In the summer when Marnie and I are working a lot, we can't go out and buy all these books ourselves. We buy them all winter. We buy them when we can, but in the summer we're a little busy, so I have some people who buy for me. So I want to thank all those people. Like I said, this isn't about getting rich. I get rich and we get rich by having family and friends who like to share books. Just a quick history of the bookstore. For those of you who don't know, some people are still amazed that this bookstore has been here for over 30 years and they didn't know about it. We're just right around the corner from Maribella's, I can see, Wawa, the church, the water tower is a block up the street, the Bay, one block behind me, hence the name, the Bayside Book Chats. This is actually the second time that Marnie and I have owned this business, and we don't know if it's the third or the fifth or the fourth and the sixth. We're missing maybe possibly the first owner. Prior to this, Michael Zuccato, his family's one of the original 5 families in Stone Harbor, and one of my artists here. This was his aunt's hair salon prior to being a bookstore. But anyway, we've got an over 30-year history. I bought it from a woman who was called Second Time Around. Her name was Mary Ann. We owned it for 5 years. We sold it to a kind lady named Rita, who had it for 8. and then in the spring of 2017, we bought it back. So here we are. In my mind, as we put this together, it's a very small store, so it's hard to fit everything in here, and we have both fiction and nonfiction. But an overall theme here in this bookstore relates to the fact that we're at the beach. So we have a lot of, course, paperbacks to read at the beach, but we have a lot of local history. We have a lot of books about the beach and birding and fish and fishing, the outdoors, beach combing. It's a very nautical store. I envision it being, if you were a local Delaware Bay sea captain in the 1800s and this was your study. Sea captains, for as much as they might have been gruff in some people's minds, they were obviously very intelligent people who had to navigate and have command of their ship and run a business. So I've always thought that this is like a ship captain's study, and maybe hence the garb and the casualness of my attire. We sell books, mostly used books, with some new books that we have for some local authors. We're always here to support local authors, and in future versions of this, as this all goes well, we'll talk about some of the local authors that we have in here. But in the meantime, our used book selection is anywhere from $3 paperbacks to collectible first printings, fiction, nonfiction. In future episodes, we'll talk about more in depth about the categories that we have. We also have local collectibles, postcards, beach tags, vintage stuff, local history. We have art by local artists. We have painters and photographers, bird carvers and sculptors, including some of my family members who do stained glass and bird carvings, and an aunt to do gift cards and pictures. The aforementioned Michael Zaccato, Tony Hillman. So if I forgot anybody, I apologize. There'll be more about that in the future. We also do appraisals. We do shipping. We do mail books. We help both the reader and the collector alike. And we do contract selling if you have a collection of higher end books that you need help evaluating and trying to sell. We do commission auction sites. Page 2. So we have fiction and nonfiction. We have a lot of beach reads, and this we'll dive into the books. So within the beach reads, I'm sure some of you ladies that like to sit down at the beach, we've got your Ellen Hilderbrand, we've got Jodi Picoult, we have, and this is debatable, people, different names to call. It's either Lisa Scottoline or Scottaline, depending upon who you talk to. And then a very popular author of the last couple of years, Kristen Hanna. So we have a lot of beach reads. We also have a lot of books that are what you would call, your Oprah's Book Club, your New York Times Book Club bestsellers. Lately, Reese Witherspoon has a group. There's a lot of people who come in here to know way more than I or we do about what the latest upcoming author is. Being a used bookstore, sometimes there's a little bit of a delay between what people want and what we have. But over the last 10 or 20 years, we really try to have the best books written and kept that we consider to be, in the book club section. And in mentioning that, one of our prides is in having so many subjects in great books. Cheers. I do like a nice dry Chianti. We try to cover the best books ever written. And 2 years ago, PBS put out a 120 book list that they let people comment, vote upon, and it wasn't what teachers or librarians or publishers or authors, or it wasn't what they thought were the best books ever written. It was what the readers thought were the best books ever written. So I printed out the list one day and checked them off, and out of the 120, we had 82 of the 120 in here the day that we printed that list. And that's what we're always trying to do. These books, they come and they go. I don't always have all the titles, but that's our goal, is to always recognize what the best books ever written were and to try to have them here for you, whether you're a collector or a reader. Mystery-wise, and I'll rattle through these so I don't take up all your time. Traditional, Agatha Christie. A lot of Agatha Christie fans. The traditional British thinking person's mystery without all the gore and the violence. Lately, in the thriller section, we have a lot of David Baldacci, Harlan Coben. My buddy Warren Wade's a big Harlan Coben reader, and Lee Child. Very popular right now. We have some authors that maybe aren't as known in the U.S. Some of these, not all, are Scandinavian authors. They write more small town intellectual mysteries rather than the shoot 'em ups, and they're very popular. We have Joe Nesbo. I'm sure you're familiar with the Girl's Hornet's Nest series by Stieg Larsson. He's passed away, but his books are always read, and a very popular author from Scandinavia, Henning Mankell. And then, of course, here in the U.S., I've got Patterson. How he writes them all, I don't know, but he's got tons, and we have tons. So that takes care of the mystery thriller section. We've talked about book club. We talked about beach reads. But one thing the store is always going to feature, and see where that pile is. Maybe I don't have the big pile. Classics. So in this time of being cooped up and wondering what to read, and maybe you're tired of your author you've always read, go back and read the classics. They're classics for a reason. And there's so many different authors writing so many different ways, but the best of those, of course, are John Steinbeck. Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises. If you want to take your brain on a vacation during these tough times where you can't travel, but maybe you want to read a book that'll take your brain on a vacation, The Sun Also Rises is a great walk through Europe. If you want to get into rethinking our government and philosophy in a new way, go back and read the classics, Fahrenheit 451, 1984, or George Orwell's The Animal Farm, to maybe revisit a little bit of mindset in this day and age. Children's books, we have both classic children's books and just fun stuff for little kids. If you're ever here in the summertime, we have a trunk full of kids' books to pick through. Page 3. As I mentioned, we have a lot of nonfiction. My father was a history teacher, and my brother's an educator, so we have a lot of nonfiction in here. And nature is a big part of not only Cape May County, but in my family. So I'm going to give you a quick history of some of the greatest books we have in here. If you're birders, there are 3 or 4 well-known American bird authors, and of course, Audubon. 1800s, traveled around America and made notes, and that became the beginning of the first bird guides in America with art in them, very in-depth. In the 70s, a very famous guy took it to the whole next level. This was Roger Tory Peterson, renowned birder in America. And then currently, a guy who spent a lot of time in Cape May, because all birders now, if they want to be anybody, they spend time in Cape May. To meet people, be part of the scene here. We're a natural migratory flyway called the Atlantic Flyway, and a lot of birding happens here in the most prolific, well-known book Bible to have in birding, with both all his original artwork, just like Audubon and Peterson did, is David Sibley. That is the #1 bird book in America. And if you are a local birder and you need the old 1930s history of Cape May combined with the history of birding in Cape May, started it all by Oliver or by Whitmer Stone. This is called Bird Studies at Old Cape May. Famous. A 2-volume set of this book in original 1930s hardback, depending upon condition, is a $200 to $400 set. And then our biggest local birder of current fame is a writer who not just writes about birding but other things in natural history, is Pete Dunn. We have a lot of Pete Dunn books, both signed, first printings, down to common paperbacks. He's written a lot about local birding, and then one of his best books to read if you love local history is Pete Dunn's Bayshore Summer. It's the history of the Delaware Bay, from farming to shelling to fishing to birding. It's a great read. And then in getting into the classics, Silent Spring, most famous environmentalist in American history. Rachel Carson, she discovered the effects of DDT, and if more people had paid attention to her in 1970s, maybe we'd be a little further along. Also a very courageous woman. She had to go into Congress and convince them that chemicals backed by lobbyists and big companies were doing damage to our environment. And then on a lighter note, nobody can beat what we all should do right now instead of cabin fever, is take a little walk in the woods by Bill Bryson. I have some other natural books here relating to fishing and the ocean. Moby Dick. A book was written in the 1600s. This is the first book ever written on fishing. It was written by a guy, this book's not from the 1600s, this is late 1800s, but it was written in the 1600s in the British Isles. He was the first guy to make notes and tie his own flies and figure out where fish were hiding in streams and what species they were. It's called The Complete Angler. For all of us that love local history in the ocean, Shadow Divers, True Adventures of Two Americans Who Risked Everything to find a sunken submarine off the coast of New Jersey, and then went back to Europe to tell the German families what happened to their ship and that they had found it. All the local surfers and fishermen down here that I hang out with, we've all watched all the great stories of crabbing in Alaska, and this is Captain Sig Hansen's book, North by Northwestern, about his ship. And then getting back to the classics, Old Man in the Sea, Ernest Hemingway, and then a book all about Hemingway on fishing. So we have a lot of fishing, nautical, and outdoor books. Is another page. What did I miss on here? Some of my favorites. The Sea Captain by, or The Sea Wolf, pardon me, by Jack London. Old Man in the Sea, we talked about. Kon-Tiki, I got my shirt on. This is the adventures done by a Norwegian who proved how Peruvians in a raft made it all the way to Polynesia. Very, very famous adventurer, Kon-Tiki. We have a lot of books on fishing, striped bass, local fishing. We talked about the field guides. I got walls and walls of field guides, shelling, birding, beach combing. A lot of history in here. My father, as I mentioned, was a history teacher, and history and science that we just talked about teaches us so many things about where the world has been and where it can go based upon facts and science. Neat thing about history writers, they're not on a blog. Well, they might have a blog, but they put their name on the book. In the back of the book is their picture, and it says, I've got a dog and 2 kids and I live here. I've written these other books. This is what I believe in. And then they are who they say they are, not a fake name. And then they're putting themselves out there in the world of debate, whether it be history or science. At least they're putting their name out there in an honest way that people can debate. What was the proper history of the Civil War? What was right or wrong? What's true or not? Where is science leading us? Is this theory correct? It's up for debate, but at least they're saying who they are, from no matter how how you view it. So a lot of history here, and history can be portrayed through memoirs and biographies. We've got Anne Frank's diaries in here, and talk about trying to survive in a tough time, locked up. We all have to do some self-reflection and maybe some diary writing and think about the world. She was doing that as she wrote those diaries out. We've got Nickel and Dined, a book written over 10 years ago about how to survive, like many Americans do, on low funds, and how the government is affecting that. Did I have a little pile here? Oh, I got a little pile here relating to some of those things. If you need a little life picker-upper, we got Marley and Me. You need a little more wisdom, Tuesdays with Maury. You need to talk about economics and things like we were talking about before, and being raised and raising yourself and families, The Glass Castle. If you feel like you don't know where you're in life, but you need to find it, and you need to take yourself for a walk or a hike like we all do, a lot of these movies were made out of. We've got Wild. So that got crossed off a little bit on my list there. Again, I'm being redundant. Pardon me. Cheers. In the U.S. history, I'm going to get a little braggadocious for a moment. My daughter's probably going to smile and smirk for a second. The reason we have so much history in here is, like I said, my father was a history teacher in junior high, retired, has his master's degree. When we were kids, during summer break, we visited national parks and museums. My parents do that to this day. When I say, "What are you doing today?" They're off to see something and learn something. My brother Mike is in charge of the operations of a charter school, in Connecticut. And my brother gave a speech in the late 80s at Franklin and Marshall. He went to a poli-sci college that they were so proud of who they were. They called themselves the Diplomats. So when I played them in college sports, I went to Elizabethtown, and not that the Blue Jays were a real fierce mascot name, but they were called the Diplomats. So that's not exactly anything to be fearful of on the sports field. But he gave a speech that relates to history and science, like I mentioned, and it basically, a quick summary of it was that in America we can't keep showing up at the last minute with lawyers, guns, and money and solving problems. We need to plan ahead, and looking at this event that we're going through now from 10,000 feet, I think a little bit more of history and science and recognition and planning may have gone a long way into maybe not putting ourselves in the predicament that we're in. I don't want to get too political, but from 10,000 feet, I think we could have done a better job of recognizing where we're at, and where we're headed as a country. And I hope that going forward, whether it's greenhouse gases, the environment, the water you want to drink, the debate upon sea rise, global warming, that we pay more attention to my brother's speech. We pay more attention to Rachel Carson. We pay more attention to our leaders in science, in health, and even history, so they can tell us the story of these things, so we have a better understanding of things, so we can make better decisions as a government, and a people. U.S. history, we got a lot of it. Like I said, my dad was a history teacher. A couple other connections to get back to the braggadocious part. We have a famous author in my family. Cousin Ed Lengle was recently a big contributor to the History Channel's, was it History Channel, Parker? Right. 3-part documentary on the history of Washington. He worked for the University of Virginia and was the steward of Washington's papers, and he's a top Washington biographer. He's written a lot of books on Washington, and his name is Ed Lengle. I try to carry them here in the store when I have them. We have a local author who prints new books, who lives a couple blocks away. His name is Tim McGrath, and he's written books on President Madison, Commodore Barry, Commodore Barry Bridge into Philly, and the beginnings of the U.S. Navy, which, getting back to my family again, crisscrossed with two people in my family heritage. I'm a descendant of both Michael Hilligas, the first treasurer of the United States before Hamilton. Getting back to the Washington story, if you know much about that, Hamilton and Washington were very tight. They had common beliefs, and it was Hamilton that Washington picked to be the first official treasurer after they officially became the United States. To show you the mindset of my forefather, he decided to resign his post rather than shoot him like Adam Burr. Was it Adam Burr?
Aaron Burr.
My apologies. Like Aaron Burr did, my relative resigned his position. His name was Michael Hilligas, the first treasurer of the United States. And then another relative of ours signed a declaration. His name was Stephen Hopkins, from a senator from Rhode Island. And it was his brother that was the first Commodore of the U.S. Navy. So oddly enough, one relative of mine was trying to fund the beginnings of the U.S. Navy, which involved another relative of mine who signed it, the declaration. And I just mentioned all that, so I'll be quiet about my family braggadocious. I talked about all that stuff. So we're winding down, I promise. That all leads to mindset, which all leads to a big section of my store, which is for the thinking man. Going back to Aristotle and Plato. We've got philosophy, religion, theology. We've got great economic books. Where did I put those? I don't know where I put them. But I've got books by Gladwell, who wrote Blink, Thomas Friedman. They've got to be here somewhere. But basically books about economics. There we go. There we go. There we go. There's a different pile here. So here's a different pile. These are all authors that have written about sociology and history in some way, shape, or form. Sebastian Junger, of course, this was a nonfiction story. It's the perfect storm, but he went on to write a lot of books about segments of American history. Into the Wild. Yes, it's more on the nature side, but a true story about a gentleman who went out to get away from the hustle and bustle and clear his mind, and unfortunately didn't make it back, but his notes were left. Again, Bill Bryson, a great history writer. Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. He's another American author who picks an event in history and then writes about it. My guess is that one of these authors is probably going to write something about this most recent event, and they're probably starting now. He would be a one to do that, and leading right into that, this gentleman already did. Pre this, Guns, Germ, and Steel, about how the world works and how inventions and time periods in history, and of course we all know that in history we've had pandemics, plagues before, and on a lighter note, a lot of fiction books have been written about that too, from The Hot Zone by Richard Preston, which became the movie Outbreak. Michael Crichton wrote, he's the author of Jurassic Park. He always wrote about science. His first book was called The Andromeda Strain, about microbes getting to planet Earth from a satellite. So both fiction and nonfiction, we've got some reference to what we're currently going through. You'll see this guy on TV a lot currently now when the talking heads talk about where our society is today. Thomas Friedman, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, again talking about the economics and sociology and demographics and where world cultures are at and what we're doing as a people. And then the aforementioned guy that wrote Blink, Malcolm Gladwell, again writes about those kinds of things. On a lighter note, if you like historical fiction, you don't want the heavy stuff from fiction, we've got James Michener, all the way down to a little bit looser, Diana Gabaldon. You know, what's the name of that series that Mom watches?
Outlander?
Outlander. So, yes, it's a little bit more sultry than maybe you would think historical fiction is, but when you're reading the series, it does tell you about a time period, and some people don't want King George the this and the names, facts, and dates. They just want a lighter read, you know, a Philippa Gregory kind of a thing, to give you a little bit of a lighter sense of history. And James Michener was really one of the pioneers of that. To take science in a whole new way, of course, we've got science fiction. Whether it was the Michael Crichton book, Andromeda Strain, that I mentioned too, sci-fi, of course, is a great escapism, but then also includes scary things like pandemics and things like that. You know, when I was a young boy, before Star Wars, a lot of young boys read Outdoor Adventure, Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn and Jack London the Sea Wolf, and of course now the movie Out, the Call of the Wild. Then in the 70s, post Star Trek in the 50s and 60s, and then you had Star Wars. A lot of books were written about going into space, and now a lot of it's about computers, Ready Player One, and books involving computers. But you know, a great way to take your brain away from all that's going on and go into pure fantasy. You know, of course, the classics of that, Harry Potter. No better book series for young and adult to take you away from it all. And then we've got Tolkien in the whole Hobbit series, you know, probably the most renowned fantasy author series of all time. and then C.S. Lewis. So we've got that kind of stuff in this store. And we're going to end it off. One last toast. Hopefully somebody out there is having a glass with me. As Billy Joel says, your bottle of red or your bottle of white. But we're going to do a little trivia. And this will be for something. You can Facebook us on Barrier Island Books and Art. You can mail us at 9501 3rd Avenue here in Stone Harbor. We're giving $5 bookstore credits to anybody who sends us any answers, but we're giving $25 in credit to the first who has it all correct. If we don't get anybody who has it all correct first, then we'll give it to the person who had the most correct answers. So here we go. We're going to do this every time we do a show. We've got local trivia. What year was the centennial year of Stone Harbor? So we had an incorporation year, but what year recently did we celebrate that 100 years? What was our centennial year? What was the first year that Stone Harbor printed a beach tag? We sell beach tags here at the store. If you want to build your collection, the early ones in the 70s, I'll give you a clue there, it's in the 70s, are worth more than the ones in the later years. But what was the first year of Stone Harbor's beach tag? And if you want a bonus point, what colors was it? Stone Harbor, of course, is the name of our town. We share it with Avalon. But what is the most commonly used name that we call this island? And for bonus points, there are two names used to name this island that were before that one. So we've got Stone Harbor and Avalon. We've got a common name for the island. But what were some names of the island that may be on maps or in history prior to that? I've got a postcard here, and hopefully you won't look too close to it, but there is a governor of the state of New Jersey who future went on to be president. He inaugurated or commissioned, I guess you would call it commissioned, the Stone Harbor Bridge. What year was the bridge in the Stone Harbor commissioned, and what is the name of the former governor and president that was on that bridge that day? Next is our local library is named after an author who wrote a book, a fictional book about a young boy on this island. What is the name of that book? And for bonus points, what is the name of the author that the library is named after? And for an extra bonus point, the book has a title that names a bird, but then that bird also has a real name. So both the title of the book has the colloquial or common name used at that time period in history for that bird, but then what is the bird really called? Next question for you boaters. The Stone Harbor Yacht Club, yacht racing and all, is very famous, and Stone Harbor is very famous for a class of sailboats that were raced here that became very famous for its build. It is the name of a sailboat. What is the classification of that sailboat called? Next question. What is the name of the current mayor? And for bonus points, what is the name of the mayor before her? Next question. In terms of local history names, what is the name of Wildwood's full island? So Wildwood has North Wildwood, Wildwood, West Wildwood, Wildwood Crest. There is a common name for that island as well, and there are more than one answer. I'll honor any of them, because again, there's a name, and then there's some earlier names. Speaking of names, what is another name for the town of North Wildwood? And a harder question. This is a little harder, and it predates every other question because it's the beginnings of Cape May County. What is the first the name of the first town in Cape May County. What is its name? It was founded in 1632 by whalers and direct descendants of the Mayflower. What is the name of that town? And that is my trivia questions. Again, we're playing for real stuff here. We're playing for credit in the store. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed it enough to come back and see us in the future and share a glass of wine with us. And if it's not virtually online, hopefully May, June, whenever we get around to it, we'll see you in here on one sunset night, on a Wednesday night, on wine night. I thank you so much to everybody who's ever been a part of the store, and hope to see new people soon. Thank you. Keep tuned.